The evening sun was beaming down on the tomato beds, painting them a golden color. I carefully tied the heavy brushes to the wooden stakes, taking care not to damage the delicate stems. At 72, my hands were still strong, although my back often reminded me of itself after a long day's work in the garden. Gardening became my main hobby after I retired, especially after Doris could no longer help me tend the flowers. Our house in Green River had stood on the corner of Maple Street for 40 years. Doris had chosen it herself, falling in love with the spacious kitchen and huge living room windows. At the time, I thought the lot was too big, but my wife had dreamed of a rose garden and vegetable garden. Now I realized how right she was. The land gave me peace and meaning to each day. Mrs. Collins, a neighbor, waved to me over the low fence, watering her petunias from an old watering can. Ellen was the same age as Doris, and after my wife's funeral, she was the one who often dropped by with homemade baked goods or just to chat about the weather. I was just about to bring the gardening tools into the house when the phone rang. The old one had been hanging on the kitchen wall since Doris's time, and she had absolutely refused to change it to a cordless one. "This one will last another 20 years, she said, and as always, she was right. "Dad, it's Brandon." His son sounded unusually awake, like he'd had an extra cup of coffee. Our conversations were usually short and businesslike. Brandon called once a week, asking about my health, telling me news about the grandchildren I saw only 3 times a year for the holidays. "Hey, son, how are you doing?" "Great, just great. Listen, I got news for you. Remember your birthday's coming up?" Of course I remember. 72 years old is not the age to forget birthdays. On the contrary, every new year feels like a gift from fate. "Yes, I remember. Is something wrong?" "Caroline and I have decided to throw you a real birthday party, a big family surprise. You know how many relatives we have that you haven't seen in a while." It was weird. Brandon had never shown much enthusiasm for family gatherings in recent years. We usually celebrated my birthday modestly. He and Caroline would come over for dinner, bring the grandkids, give me a shirt or a book. Quiet, family style, no fuss. "That's very sweet of you, but don't worry. You know, at my age, you prefer peace and quiet." "Dad, don't be silly. You're only 72. You're in great shape." Caroline's already made the guest list and ordered the food. "Uncle Lester's coming too. Can you believe it? And Aunt Gloria and her husband from Portland. We want you to have a birthday party to remember." Uncle Lester is my father's younger brother, a successful lawyer who's always kept his family apart. The only time we saw each other was at funerals, and that was rare. What made Brandon want to invite him to my birthday party? "When are you planning this event?" "Saturday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The weather's supposed to be nice, so we can sit in the garden. Caroline says you've got beautiful blooms out there right now." I looked out the window at my roses. Doris planted them the first year we lived in this house. Every spring I pruned the bushes, fertilized the soil, and watched for pests. The roses bloomed lush and bright, as if my wife still cared for them with her tender hands. "All right, son, if it's important to you, let's have a party." "Great! See you on Saturday." "And Dad, it's going to be a really special day. Trust me." After Brandon hung up the phone, I stood at the window for a long time longer, watching the evening shadows lengthen on the lawn. Something in his voice alarmed me. Too much enthusiasm, too much detail for an ordinary birthday party. Doris always said she had a sixth sense about people. "Raymond, when a person explains too much, it means they're hiding something," she'd repeat after another meeting with neighbors or acquaintances. I had laughed at her suspiciousness at the time, but the years had shown me that my wife was rarely wrong about people. Brandon had been a good son, but after marrying Caroline, something had changed in him. His sister-in-law kept a polite but cold demeanor, as if she were performing duties rather than socializing with her family. Doris had tried several times to get close to her, inviting her to tea, offering to help with the grandchildren, but Caroline always found a reason to refuse. I went into the living room and turned on the floor lamp next to Doris's chair. It was a habit I hadn't gotten rid of in 3 years. In the evenings we'd sit here together, I'd read the paper, she'd knit or do crossword puzzles. Sometimes we turned on the TV, but more often we just talked about the past day and made plans for tomorrow. On the coffee table was our wedding photo in a silver frame. Young, happy, full of hope. Doris was a beautiful woman, Dark hair, lively brown eyes, a smile that brought dimples to her cheeks. I fell in love with her at first sight at a dance at the community center. She was 20, I was 23. We married a year later and lived together for 45 years. Doris died quietly in her sleep of a heart attack. The doctors said she didn't suffer. It was the only consolation in those terrible days. Brandon helped with the funeral arrangements, but even then he kept a detached demeanor, as if he were doing an unpleasant but necessary job. Maybe this birthday party was his way of reestablishing family ties, an attempt to bring the family together like Doris did for the holidays? My wife had always been the soul of the family. She remembered the birthdays of great nieces, wished anniversaries to distant relatives, organized get-togethers. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat down in my chair. It was getting dark outside the window, and the streetlights were on. Somewhere a dog barked, a car with loud music drove by. The usual sounds of an evening green river that I'd grown accustomed to over the decades. Tomorrow I'll need to mow the lawn, check the irrigation system in the greenhouse, maybe drive to the nursery for new seedlings. The measured, quiet life of a retiree suited me better than anything else in the world. No fuss, no stress, just earth, plants, and memories of happy years with Doris. But Saturday's birthday party would shatter that peace. The house will be filled with voices, laughter, maybe even music. It's been a long time since I've seen so many people in my house at once. Saturday morning was clear and warm. I woke up at 7:30 as I always did, even though I didn't need an alarm clock. Decades of work had accustomed my body to a strict schedule, and even retirement hadn't changed that habit. Birds were chirping outside the window, and somewhere in the distance a lawnmower was working. Mrs. Collins always started cleaning the property early so she could get there before the heat of the day. After drinking coffee on the veranda, I made the final preparations for the party. I wiped down the garden furniture with a damp cloth, swept the paths, and checked that there was enough water in the bird drinkers. Doris always said a house should welcome guests with cleanliness and order. "It doesn't matter if you're rich or modest, as long as it's neat and tidy," she repeated, cleaning every corner before the relatives arrived. Around 10 in the morning, Brandon's car pulled up, a new silver sedan he'd bought last year. Carolyn climbed out, wearing white jeans and a silk blouse clearly not meant for work. Her son came out with large cardboard boxes in his hands. "Hi, Daddy." "Oh no," Caroline shouted, heading towards me with a wide smile. "What a beautiful day for a celebration. And your garden is gorgeous. The roses are blooming like a magazine." The compliment sounded strained, like a learned phrase. Caroline had never taken much interest in my garden, but now she was talking about the roses as enthusiastically as if she'd dreamed of being a landscape designer all her life. "Oh, thank you. What's in the boxes?" "Treats, decorations, everything you need for the party," Brandon answered, putting the boxes on the porch. Caroline had spent all of yesterday afternoon preparing. Her sister-in-law did look a little tired, but there was a feverish gleam in her eyes. She looked around the house and grounds with the air of a general planning a military operation. It was strange to see such activity in a man who usually preferred to keep out of family events. "Raymond, where did you keep the deeds to the house?" Caroline asked out of the blue while we were taking boxes into the kitchen. "You know, for insurance, anything can happen at a party. People are careless. They might break something or smash something." The question took me by surprise. In 40 years, no guest has ever caused serious damage to our house. And what's the connection between insurance and title deeds? "The deeds are in the safe. What exactly are you worried about?" "Well, you know how complicated legal matters are these days. Brandon said you don't have a will, which could cause problems in the future. We just want to make sure it's done right." That was even weirder. A will is a pretty sensitive topic, and it's not usually brought up on a birthday amidst talk of decorations and treats. Besides, I vividly remembered discussing these very issues with Brandon 3 years ago after Doris's funeral. "I have a will. I made it after Mom died." "Yeah? Where's it kept?" "Cherie." Carolyn tried to keep her voice casual, but I could see her shoulders tense. "At the bank, in a safe deposit box. The family lawyer has a copy." "Who's your lawyer? Maybe we should contact him, update some of the clauses." Brandon, meanwhile, was sorting through boxes, pretending not to listen to our conversation. But I saw him slow his movements, listening to every word. What was going on? Why did they need information about my papers today? Caroline, why don't we leave the legal issues for another day? It's a holiday. Of course, of course. I'm just worried about you. At your age, it's important to have your paperwork in order. At my age, I'm 72, not 92. I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs and don't need a guardian. But I kept silent, not wanting to spoil the mood before the guests arrived. The next hour passed in preparation for the party. Caroline hung colorful garlands on the veranda, arranged bouquets of artificial flowers on the tables, and unpacked disposable dishes. Everything looked festive, but somehow impersonal, like decorations for a corporate event. Doris never used artificial flowers. Why buy fake when there's so much living beauty growing around? She said, cutting roses and peonies for bouquets. Even in winter, she preferred sprigs with buds or dried grains to natural plastic arrangements. Brandon set up the music system in the garden and checked the sound. The speakers were hidden among the bushes, but the music was loud enough to be heard throughout the property. Classic tunes, nothing modern or cheeky. Apparently the sun had taken the age of the guests into account. "Dad, where are the photo albums?" Brandon asked, walking into the house. "The photographer will want to see family photos for compositions." "In the cupboard, bottom drawer." "But why would a photographer want old albums?" "Well, you know, modern photographers like to create themed shots. Family history, 3 generations, that sort of thing." My son pulled out some albums and started flipping through them. I noticed that he was particularly scrutinizing photos of our house, how it looked right after we bought it, what changes we had made over the years. Why would a photographer need this information? "It's always been a beautiful house," Caroline said, looking over my husband's shoulder. "It's a nice lot, too. I guess real estate like this is expensive now, huh?" I hadn't thought about it. "I'm not going to sell." Of course, of course. I'm just wondering how prices have changed over the years." "Brandon said you bought the house for $12,000? $14,000, but that was 40 years ago, and prices were different then. Now it's probably worth 10 times that now, isn't it? Maybe even more?" I shrugged. It was true that real estate in Green River had gone up over the decades, but I'd never been interested in the market value of my house. It wasn't just property, but the place where my entire conscious life had been spent, where every room held memories of happy years with Doris. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the first guests began to arrive. Aunt Gloria and her husband Arthur drove up from Portland in an old but well-maintained station wagon. Gloria had aged over the years. Her hair had turned gray and there were deep wrinkles around her eyes, but her smile was still as warm as Doris's. "Raymond, darling." She hugged me tightly, and I smelled the familiar scent of the lavender soap my sisters always used. "Happy birthday. God, you look just like Daddy at that age." Arthur shook my hand and handed me a gift-wrap box. "From both of us." Gloria picked it out, so I don't know what's in it, but she assured me you'd love it. Next came the cousins on my father's side, Walter and his wife and teenage son. Then came the Johnson neighbors whom I hadn't seen in years. Mr. Johnson had recently suffered a stroke and was getting around with a stick, but he looked alert. "Raymond, what a wonderful garden." Mrs. Johnson admired the rose bushes. Doris would be so proud. I remember her planning this rose garden, choosing the varieties, consulting with the gardeners. "Thank you. I try to keep it just the way she wanted it." "You're doing the right thing. A house without a garden isn't a house. It's just a building." Gradually, the plot filled up with people. Relatives arrived whom I really hadn't seen in a long time. Third cousin nieces with their families, distant cousins, old neighbors who once lived next door, and then moved to other neighborhoods. Some I barely recognized. Time had changed their faces, added gray hair and wrinkles, but their voices remained the same. Brandon and Caroline scurried between guests, offering drinks, introducing people to each other, taking pictures. The sister-in-law was surprisingly sociable, laughing, hugging unfamiliar aunts, telling jokes. Totally different from the reserved woman I've known over the years. "Raymond is so good," I heard her voice from the group of women by the rose bushes. At his age, living alone in such a big house, running the household, tending the garden. Brandon and I worry about him all the time. "Why doesn't he move to a smaller apartment?" a strange woman asked. "Or one of those state-of-the-art senior centers? There's medical care nearby, and leisure activities are organized. We offered, Caroline sighed. But you know how stubborn men are at that age. They're used to their own way of life. This conversation made me uncomfortable. No one was suggesting that I move into an apartment or a nursing home. Moreover, I was doing fine with all the household problems and didn't need anyone's help. Why would Caroline make me look like a feeble old man in front of people who had known me for decades? Around 2 o'clock, Uncle Lester arrived. A tall, trim man of 78 in an impeccable suit and tie. Even at a family party, he looked like a lawyer, ready to conduct business negotiations at a moment's notice. Sir, happy birthday, nephew. Lester shook my hand firmly. 72 is a great age. It's a good time to enjoy the fruits of your labors. Thanks for coming, Uncle. I didn't expect to see you. Brandon was very insistent, said he had something special planned. Lester looked at the guests and the decorations. It was really quite impressive. How many people are here? I looked around the lot. There were a lot of people, a lot more than I'd expected. Adults, children, teenagers, elderly relatives. Some I could hardly recognize and some I didn't recognize at all. 80 people probably, maybe more. That's a lot of people. Who organized it? Brandon? Caroline. She made the guest list, ordered the food. Lester nodded, but there was a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. His uncle had spent his life working with people, dealing with all sorts of characters and situations. Developed a special sense of subterfuge and ulterior motives. Is there a special occasion? Anniversary. Anniversary. Just a birthday. 72 years. I see. Lester took another look at the crowd. I'm sorry, Raymond, but I have to go out for a few minutes. It's an important call. My uncle went to the far corner of the garden, took out his cell phone, and started talking to someone. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell by the look on his face that the conversation was serious. Meanwhile, Caroline announced that it was time to get to the table. The guests were seated at long tables that Brandon had set up under the shade of large maple trees. The food looked appetizing. Salads, hot dishes, desserts, all neatly arranged on plates. Aris, dear family and friends. Brandon stood up with a glass in his hand. We are gathered today to celebrate the birthday of the most wonderful father and grandfather, my dad, Raymond. The guests clamored and clapped their hands. Some shouted, congratulations. Some whistled. A festive atmosphere, family warmth, everything as it is supposed to be at such events. Dad has accomplished a lot in life, Brandon continued. He'd worked for a construction company for 30 years, raised me, and created this beautiful house and garden with Mom. Now it was time to rest and enjoy some well-deserved peace. I listened to my son's speech and felt a growing unease. The words were right, but the tone was disingenuous. It was as if Brandon were reading a prepared text, not speaking from his heart about his own father. And today, his voice became solemn, today we have a special announcement to make about the future of our family. The guests fell silent, waiting for the continuation. I felt my heart throb. A special announcement? What's it about? Carolyn stood beside her husband, put her hand on his shoulder, and smiled at the crowd, the same feverish gleam in her eyes that I'd noticed that morning. Donnery ye one. But first, let's raise a glass to the birthday boy, Brandon shouted. The guests stood up, raised their glasses, and clamored congratulations. I automatically stood up with everyone else, feeling like an actor in a play whose plot I didn't know. After the toast, the guests dispersed around the site, forming small groups to talk. I wandered between the tables, accepting congratulations, hugging relatives I hadn't seen in years. The atmosphere was festive, but something about the whole event kept nagging me. Too much theatricality, too many unfamiliar faces among supposedly close relatives. Aunt Gloria came over to me with a plate of salad and sank tiredly into a garden chair. Raymond, who are all these people? She asked quietly, nodding toward the group of young women at the fountain. I don't recognize half the guests, and I know this family like the back of my hand. To be honest, this is the first time I've seen many of them too, I admitted. Caroline was compiling the guest list. She must have invited people she knew from her own family. Maybe, but it's weird to call strangers relatives of the birthday boy. Gloria chewed her salad and grimaced. And it wasn't home-cooked. It was tasteless, Restaurant quality. Doris never trusted catering companies. Food should be prepared with love, she used to say, spending half a day in the kitchen before family gatherings. Her casseroles, pies, and salads had a special flavor, the taste of care and home warmth. Store-bought food, no matter how expensive, could not replace that. Uncle Lester approached us with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Gloria, Raymond, may I join you?" He sat down in a vacant chair and looked around. "This is an interesting event. Very big." "Brandon and Caroline did their best," I replied. "Absolutely. But Raymond, do they do this kind of party often? Gather so many people?" "No, it's the first time. Usually we celebrate birthdays in a small family circle." "I see." Lester rubbed his chin, a gesture I remembered from my childhood. "Do you know everyone who's invited?" "Not all of them." "Why? Is there something wrong?" "Just curious. You know, in my practice, I've seen cases where relatives put together large family gatherings for a specific purpose, to create the appearance of common ground, a collective decision. I felt a chill in my chest. Uncle Lester was not a man prone to idle chatter. If he talked about collective decisions, it meant he suspected something concrete. "Lester, what are you talking about?" Gloria perked up. "Nothing specific, just professional observations." He looked at me carefully. "Raymond, have you and Brandon had any discussions lately about, let's say, changes in life circumstances?" "What kind of changes?" "Moving, for instance. Selling real estate. Powers of attorney." "No, nothing like that." "Why do you ask?" Lester didn't have time to answer. Carolyn came to our table with a wide smile and a glass of champagne in her hand. "How are you, dear relatives? Is everyone happy with the celebration?" She sat down next to me and put her hand on my shoulder with ostentatious tenderness. "Raymond, you look a little tired. At your age, such events must be exhausting." "I feel fine," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly. Of course, but still, darling, you're about to turn 73. It's time to think about making life more peaceful, without too much worry and hassle. I've got a pretty quiet life already." "Oh yes, but this big house, this lot, all these household problems." Caroline sighed theatrically. "Edina, Brandon and I have often discussed whether it might be time for you to consider something more appropriate for your age." Uncle Lester became alert, like a hunting dog smelling game. "What exactly do you mean by more appropriate?" he asked in an even voice. "Well, you know, there are wonderful places for active seniors. Complexes where you don't have to worry about repairs, cleaning, gardening, where there's always medical care, organized recreation, the company of peers." "Are you talking about nursing homes?" Lester clarified. "Oh God, no!" Caroline laughed too loudly. "I'm talking about modern apartment complexes for people of elegant age. The facilities there are amazing, believe me." "What does Raymond think of the idea?" "We haven't discussed the details yet," Caroline answered quickly. "But I'm sure that when he sees all the advantages—" "Excuse me, but isn't Raymond the one who should be making these decisions?" Lester interrupted her. "This is his home, his life." Caroline was confused for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "Of course, we're just taking care of him. It's customary in the family to discuss important matters together, isn't it?" Aunt Gloria watched this exchange in silence, but I could see her lips tighten. Doris had taught her sister to be a good judge of character, and Gloria could sense something was amiss. Luckily, the conversation was interrupted by the children. The grandchildren came running up to me, asking me to show them the greenhouse. I got up from the table with relief and led them to the far end of the plot, where behind a thicket of raspberries stood my pride, a glass greenhouse which I built with my own hands 10 years ago. "Grandpa, what is that?" 8-year-old Tyler asked, pointing to the tomato bushes. "Tomatoes. Do you want to try one?" I plucked a ripe fruit and rubbed it on my shirt. Tyler took a careful bite, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Wow, not like the store." "That's because I grow them with love," I explained. "Plants can sense when they are truly cared for." 5-year-old Emma reached for the beautiful peppers, and 12-year-old Jacob scrutinized the watering system. "Grandpa, why do you have so many things growing here?" he asked. "You can just buy vegetables at the supermarket." "You can. But when you grow something yourself, it tastes different. And then, I like working with the earth. It calms me down, helps me think. Did your grandmother like gardening too? Very much. She said gardening was a way of talking to nature. We spent about 20 minutes in the greenhouse. The children asked questions, tasted different vegetables, helped me water the seedlings. It was the first quiet minutes of the whole day. No tension, no strange conversations, just grandpa and grandkids among the plants. When we got back to the guests, I noticed that the atmosphere had changed. People had gathered in a large group near the main table, where Brandon was standing with some unfamiliar man in a dark suit. The man was about 45 years old with a neat beard and a briefcase in his hand. Clearly not a relative or a neighbor. "Ah, there's the birthday boy," Brandon exclaimed when he saw me. "Dad, I'd like you to meet Donald Craig, the legal consultant. He's going to help us with some formalities." "Legal counselor? At a birthday party?" I shook hands with the stranger, who smiled a professional smile. "Mr. Harris, it's very nice to meet you. Your son has told me a lot of good things about you." "Likewise. What are the formalities of having a lawyer present at a family reunion?" "Oh, it's nothing complicated," Brandon interjected. "We just want to make sure the paperwork is correct. You know, there are very strict requirements for real estate deeds these days." I looked around at the assembled guests. Many of them looked at me expectantly, as if they were waiting for some kind of performance. The children were playing on the lawn, oblivious to the adult conversations, but everyone else was focused on our group. Uncle Lester stood off to the side, watching with a stone face. Next to him, Aunt Gloria was saying something quietly in his ear. Both of them looked worried. "Why don't we put business matters aside?" I suggested. "It's a holiday." "Dad, it'll only take a few minutes," Brandon insisted. "Mr. Craig was here to help us. And now that the whole family's here, it's a good opportunity to talk things over." "Talk about what?" Carolyn stepped closer and took my hand in hers. There was no warmth in her touch, only determination. "Dear Raymond, we just want to take care of your future. At your age, it's important to plan ahead. My future is fine with me. But you can't live alone in a big house like this forever," Mr. Craig intervened. "Sooner or later, there will be health problems and property maintenance problems. It's better to make a sensible decision now while you can think clearly." That last part sounded like an insult. "While I'm thinking clearly? What is that supposed to mean?" "Mr. Craig, I'm thinking clearly, and I'm capable of making my own decisions." Of course, of course. No one doubts your intelligence. But you must agree that your family knows best what's good for you." I looked at Brandon. My son avoided a direct gaze, studying his shoes. Caroline smiled a strained smile. The unfamiliar lawyer kept talking some nonsense about planning for the future. All around me were people I barely knew, nodding their heads as if they agreed with what was going on. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, I noticed Mrs. Collins's neighbor, looking confused and worried. Uncle Lester stepped forward. "Excuse me, but who are you?" He turned to Mr. Craig. "Yeah, I mean, what law firm are you from? What is your specialty?" "Donald Craig, private practice. I specialize in family law, guardianship, estate administration." "I see. Are you licensed?" "Of course I have a license." Craig looked a little insulted. "I've been in this field for 15 years. "That's good. Do you mind if I check your credentials with the bar register?" "Uncle Lester, what's the big deal?" Brandon intervened. "Mr. Craig is a professional with an excellent reputation. I just want to make sure. You see, Brandon, when it comes to real estate for the elderly, you have to be especially careful. There are too many scammers out there." The word crooks hung in the air, and I saw Mr. Craig pale. Or maybe I was imagining it. "Lester, you're overreacting," Brandon said, but I could hear the irritation in his voice. "We just want to help Dad." "Help with what exactly?" "Moving to a better place, with the paperwork, practical matters." "Has Raymond asked for that kind of help?" All eyes turned to me. I stood at the center of this strange spectacle, feeling like a bargaining chip. My own home, my own birthday, my own family, and suddenly I was the one to be persuaded. "I didn't ask anyone for anything," I said clearly and loudly for all to hear. "I'm comfortable in my house and I don't plan to move." "Dad, don't be stubborn," Brandon started, but Uncle Lester interrupted him. "I think it's clear." Raymond made his point. "Uncle Lester, you don't understand the situation," Caroline said with a note of despair in her voice. Raymond can't adequately assess all the risks. At his age, people become, well, more trusting, less cautious. He seems like a reasonable man to me, and he's entitled to live where he wants to live. The conversation grew more and more tense. The guests began to whisper. The children sensed something wrong and moved closer to the adults. The festive atmosphere evaporated, giving way to some unpleasant confrontation. I looked at all this and thought about how quickly life can change. One morning I was preparing for an ordinary family holiday, and now I was standing in my own garden, defending the right to live in my own home. The tension in the air grew thicker and thicker. The guests split into two groups, some standing closer to Brandon and Caroline, nodding in agreement, others standing off to the side with puzzled faces. Uncle Lester pulled out his phone and started searching something on it, probably checking Mr. Craig's information in the lawyer's registry. Brandon coughed nervously and raised his hand, demanding attention. Dear relatives, let's not turn the holiday into a discussion. We have a specific proposal that we wanted to discuss as a family. He looked around at the crowd. Caroline and I have found a wonderful place for Dad. Sunny Gardens is a modern apartment complex for people of elegant age in the suburbs. A nursing home, Uncle Lester said quietly, still on the phone. No, not a nursing home, Caroline said indignantly. It's a full-service apartment complex. Own apartments, restaurant, medical center, library, gymnasium. Raymond will be happy there. Who says I'm not happy here? I asked. Dad, look at things realistically. Brandon made a wide gesture that encompassed the entire lot. This house is too big for one person. The garden needs constant maintenance. What happens if you fall down, get sick, need help? The nearest neighbors are 100 yards away. Medical help 20 minutes away. In 40 years, I've never been seriously ill. Not yet, but at your age, that can change in a day. Caroline stepped closer, and I saw a kind of feverish determination in her eyes. We just want you to be safe. The facilities at Sunny Gardens are great, Mr. Craig said. 24-hour security, a nurse on the floor, organized meals. You don't have to worry about any domestic problems. What will happen to my house? We'll sell it, Brandon answered quickly. The proceeds will be enough to pay for Sunny Gardens for years to come. There might even be some money left over for emergencies. I felt the ground go from under my feet. They'd already made up their minds. They'd already found the site, made the plans, brought in a lawyer, and I'd just been confronted on my own birthday in front of a bunch of people. This is my house, I said as calmly as I could. I'm not selling it. Dad, be reasonable. There was a note of irritation in Brandon's voice. You're living in the past. Mom's dead. The kids are grown. Why do you need 4 bedrooms and half an acre of land? Why do I want my house? Why do I need a place where my whole conscious life has been spent? Where every corner reminds me of happy years with Doris? Where I can touch the roses she planted with her own hands? How can I explain it to people who see the house only in terms of square footage and market value? Raymond, Mr. Craig said softly, I understand that this is a difficult decision. Being attached to a house is a natural feeling, but sometimes you have to think not only about the present, but also about the future. What kind of future can I have in a nursing home? In an apartment complex, Caroline corrected, there are lots of interesting people your age there. You can make new acquaintances, take up hobbies, participate in cultural programs. I have a hobby, gardening. Sunny Gardens also has a garden, a community garden tended by specialists. A communal garden tended by specialists. Faceless flower beds with the same type of flowers, hosed down by hired hands. No soul, no history, no connection to the past. Uncle Lester lifted his head from the phone and looked at Mr. Craig with a hard stare. I wonder, would you happen to be Donald Craig, whose license was revoked 2 years ago for elderly real estate fraud? Mr. Craig turned pale and took a step back. Yeah, this is some kind of mistake. You're confusing me with someone else. Case number A3412 in district court. Fraud, duress, forgery. Lester spoke calmly, but there was steel in his voice. The sentence was 3 years probation and a ban on practicing law. Uncle Lester, what are you talking about? Brandon looked confused. Awaf. Mr. Craig is a respectable lawyer. A former lawyer, Lester corrected. And how did he end up at my nephew's birthday party? Carolyn walked quickly to Mr. Craig and whispered something in his ear. He nodded, picked up his briefcase, and headed for the exit. I have some urgent business to attend to, he said over his shoulder. Mr. Harris, think about our offer. It's really in your best interest. Where is he going? Uncle Lester shouted. I have some questions to ask him. But Mr. Craig was already behind the gate. There was the sound of an automobile starting. The guests began to whisper, and the atmosphere became even more tense. Some people I didn't know began to quietly disperse, as if they realized that the show was over. Caroline quickly took control of the situation. Don't pay attention to this man, she said to the crowd. Sokran. The important thing is not who is helping with the paperwork, but that Raymond needs our support. We can all see that he can no longer cope with such a large household. I'm doing just fine, I objected. Of course you are, dear. Caroline came over to me and put her hands on my shoulders. But look around. How much labor this lot requires. And the house? When was the last time you did a major renovation? The plumbing's old, the wiring's old. It's not safe. If it needs fixing, I'll do it. With what money, Dad? Brandon stepped in. My pension is small, and I don't have much in savings. It would cost tens of thousands of dollars to fix up a house like this. I was confused. How did he know about my finances? I'd never discussed my pension or savings with my son. Shreyan. Besides, Caroline continued, at your age, it's important to be close to medical care. What if something serious happens? A stroke? A heart attack? A fall? You could be lying at home for days before someone finds you. She painted a grim picture, and some of the guests began to nod in agreement. The strangers were especially active, the ones I realized Caroline herself had invited. Shurkin, we're all worried about you, said an older woman I was seeing for the first time. At our age, you have to be realistic. Yes, yes, the gray-haired man said. My brother was stubborn too, and then he fell in the garden and lay there all night. Good thing the neighbors found him in the morning. These people spoke of me as an infirm old man who couldn't make sensible decisions. And I stood among them, feeling like a helpless child being scolded by adults for disobedience. Aunt Gloria came over to me and took my hand. Raymond, dear, no one has the right to force you to move. It's your life, your choice. Gloria, you don't understand, Brandon said. We're responsible for Dad. If anything happens to him, we'll be blamed. Blamed for what? That you respected his wishes? No, that we let an elderly man live in dangerous conditions. Caroline, meanwhile, was whispering about something with a group of supportive women. Then she approached me with determination. Raymond, dear, let's end this argument. She held out her hand. Give me your purse. Why? For safety. At Sunny Gardens, all financial matters are handled by the administration. You won't have to carry money and cards. Aram, I'm not going to Sunny Gardens. Of course you are. Caroline's voice became hard. We've already paid the deposit, signed the preliminary contract. The move is set for next week. Without my consent? With your consent, Brandon signed the papers as your next of kin. Brandon has no right to sign documents on my behalf. He does if his father can't make good decisions, Caroline said coldly, and your behavior today proves it. Give me your purse. She held out her hand more insistently. I saw the unfamiliar guests nodding approvingly, supporting her actions. As if it's okay to take money from a man at his own birthday party. You won't need it anymore, Caroline added. At Sunny Gardens, everything is included in the price. This is outrageous, Uncle Lester shrieked. You have no right to... Lester, don't meddle in family matters, Brandon interrupted him sharply. Dad's sick. Dementia may be setting in. We can't let him make decisions that will hurt him. Dementia? I heard that word and I felt the world around me start to crumble. They were declaring me crazy in front of a crowd of people, many of whom nodded in agreement. Dad, Brandon walked up to me with a sad expression on his face. We love you. That's why we can't watch you ruin your life. Give Caroline your wallet and cards. It's for your own good. Caroline was already reaching into my back pocket where my wallet was. Her fingers were cold and determined. Don't you dare! Uncle Lester took a step forward, but several unfamiliar guests blocked his way. Grandfather is ill, said one of them. The children know best what is good for him. I stood in a ring of people discussing my fate as if I wasn't here. Caroline pulled my wallet out of my pocket and started moving credit cards into her purse. Give me your driver's license too, Brandon said. It's dangerous to drive in your condition. What condition? I'm perfectly healthy. Dad, don't be stubborn. Look at you. You're all red, yelling at people, acting out. These are classic symptoms of age-related mental changes. Red? Of course I'm red with indignation. Anyone would blush if they were being stolen money in front of their eyes and declared insane. But the guests apparently took my condition as confirmation of my son's words. Some shook their heads sympathetically, others whispered among themselves. Poor old man, I heard a woman's voice. It's good that the children caught on in time. Yes, at that age, people become uncontrollable. My grandfather didn't want to admit his illness until the last moment. Illness? What illness? I was perfectly healthy, but the more I tried to prove it, the sicker I looked to others. Aunt Gloria was crying with her handkerchief to her eyes. Uncle Lester tried to get through to me, but they wouldn't let him in, and Caroline methodically removed all the papers and cards from my purse. That's it, she said, slamming her purse shut. Now you don't have to worry about your finances. Give me my money back, I asked, trying to speak as calmly as possible. No, Dad. It's for your own good. Brandon put his hand on my shoulder. Trust me, in a few months you'll thank us for this decision. I looked around. Most of the guests were nodding approvingly. The strangers Caroline had invited were acting as a Greek chorus, confirming that what was happening was right. Even some distant relatives I'd known for years looked at me with pity, as if I were terminally ill. Only Uncle Lester, Aunt Gloria, and Mrs. Collins looked indignant at what was happening, but they were too few against the crowd. I realized that further argument was pointless. Whatever I said would be taken as confirmation of my inadequacy. I was in a trap from which there was no escape. Silently, I turned around and walked towards the house. I heard voices behind me. You're doing the right thing. In such cases, you need to be firm. Let him calm down a little, and tomorrow it will be possible to move. Good kids. Not everyone takes that kind of responsibility. I reached the porch, turned around and looked at my house, my garden, my life. Tomorrow it could all be someone else's, and I'll be sitting in a nursing home, remembering how one day I lost everything. I took my jacket from the coat rack and left the house through the back door. No one tried to stop me. Apparently, they decided to give the sick old man time to think. I walked through the quiet streets of Green River, feeling like an outcast in my own town. I didn't have a dime in my pocket, my papers were left at Caroline's, and the house where I'd lived for 40 years had become a place I could never return to. At first, I just walked the streets of Green River without thinking about direction. My feet carried me along familiar sidewalks, past houses inhabited by people I'd known for decades. Lights were on in some windows, families gathered for dinner, children doing homework. Ordinary Saturday life from which I was suddenly cut off. By late afternoon, it was getting chilly, and I realized I needed somewhere to sleep. The only change I had in my jacket pocket was a few dollars, which I always kept separate from my wallet for emergencies. It would only be enough for a cup of coffee. On the corner of 5th Street and Central Avenue hung a sign for a pawn shop called Fast Money. The place was open late, so I decided to go in. Behind the counter sat a young man with tattoos on his arms, leafing through a magazine. Welcome. What do you want to pawn? I took off my wristwatch, a gift from Doris for our 25th wedding anniversary. It was a gold-cased Omega that I'd saved and worn only on special occasions. My heart clenched painfully as I placed it on the counter. How much can you give me? The guy took the watch, examined it carefully, checked the movement. It's a nice piece. $300 in escrow. 15% interest a month. You can buy it back within a year. $300. That'll be enough for a few days in a motel while I take care of the situation. I nodded, and in a few minutes I had the money and the deposit slip in my pocket. The Pine Grove Motel was on the outskirts of town, just off the highway. A one-story building with faded paint and a neon sign on which half the letters didn't work. The receptionist, an older woman with tired eyes, didn't even lift her head from the TV when I asked for a room. $40 a night, payment in advance, towels in the closet, ice by the machine. The room was small and shabby but clean. Narrow bed, table, chair, TV, and tiny bathroom. From the window I could see the highway, where the trucks drove continuously. The hum of engines and the squeal of brakes were not the sounds I was used to falling asleep to. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of what had happened. In the morning, I had been the owner of my own house, planning a quiet family holiday, thinking about watering the tomatoes, and now I was sitting in a cheap motel with no ID, no money, declared crazy by my family. How could this have happened? Where were the warning signs I'd missed? Caroline's strange questions about the deeds to the house, the unusual generosity with organizing the party, inviting strangers, all of these things should have alerted me. But I was too trusting, too pleased with my son's attention, to suspect a catch. Doris had warned me about Caroline when they first met. That girl doesn't love Brandon, but what he can give her, my wife had said after the first family dinner with her daughter-in-law. Look how she values our house, our furniture, your car, counting in her mind how much everything is worth. These words seemed unfair to me at the time. A young woman had the right to be interested in the financial situation of her future husband. But gradually I began to notice the details. How Caroline studied the market prices of real estate in our neighborhood. How she asked about my retirement plans. How she casually asked if I had debts or loans. And today, everything fell into place. She had been planning this for a long time, maybe for years. Gathered information about my finances, found a suitable nursing home, even found a pseudo-lawyer to give the appearance of legitimacy. And she chose my birthday for the final blow, the day I was supposed to feel surrounded by the love and care of my family. There was a knock on the door. I froze. Who could have known where I was staying? The knock came again, more insistent. Raymond, it's me, Helen. Mrs. Collins, how did she find me? I opened the door. The neighbor stood on the doorstep with a worried face, holding a thermos and a bag of food. Jesus, Raymond, what a horror today. She entered the room and looked around sadly. I saw you leaving, so I thought I'd look around. This motel is the only cheap place in town. Thanks for finding me. But how did you get into this, party? Caroline personally invited me. Said you asked me to invite all the neighbors. Ellen put the thermos on the table. I sensed something was wrong right away. Too many unfamiliar faces, too formal for a family party. What happened after I left? Brandon announced to the guests that you had age-related memory problems and asked everyone to be sympathetic to the situation. Most people left pretty quickly. Only the closest people and those strangers remained. What did Uncle Lester say? He was furious, yelled at Brandon, demanded an explanation. But your sister-in-law said it was a family matter and asked him to stay out of it. Ellen opened the thermos, and the room was filled with the aroma of homemade soup. Lester said he'd be sure to get in touch with you. The soup was chicken noodle soup, just like the kind Doris used to make on cold fall days. I didn't realize I was hungry until I started eating. Ellen, be honest. Did I really look inadequate? Sabrina, Raymond, darling, you looked like a man who'd been publicly humiliated and robbed. Anyone in your position would have been screaming and outraged. She sat back in her chair and shook her head sadly. What they did to you was a crime, but many of the guests supported them. The ones Caroline had brought, and the real family and friends were shocked. Gloria was crying her eyes out. Lester threatened to call the police. Why didn't he? Brandon said you left voluntarily. No one forced you. Technically, he's right. No one saw you fight back or ask for help. Yeah, I did leave quietly. Didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't demand my papers back. I just turned around and walked away. In the eyes of the law, it might have looked like a voluntary relinquishment of one's own property. After finishing my soup, I felt a little better. The warmth of the food and the care of my neighbor gave me back some of the confidence I had lost. What about the house? Are they running it yet? They're still cleaning up after the party, but Caroline was running the place like a total hostess. She told me where to put furniture, what to throw away. Throw out? My things, pictures, memories of 40 years with Doris. Ellen, can you do me a favor? Of course, dear. Keep an eye on the house. What they do there, who visits. Maybe it'll give you a clue as to what they're up to. I'll be sure to keep an eye on it. And if I see them throwing away your personal belongings, I'll try to salvage something. After she left, I lay down on the narrow bed and tried to fall asleep to the hum of passing cars. But sleep didn't come. The events of the day, words, looks, intonations were spinning in my head. I remembered every detail, trying to understand when exactly everything went wrong. Around midnight, the room phone rang. Who would be calling the motel at this hour? Dad? It's Brandon. How did he know where I was staying? What do you want? I need to talk to you. You left so suddenly you didn't let us explain the situation. What situation? The one where you took my money and called me crazy? Dad, please don't be so hard on yourself. We're really worried about your health. You've been acting very strangely today, yelling at guests, refusing to listen to reason. Reasonable arguments? You wanted to evict me from my own home. Not evict me, but help me move to a more suitable place. Dad, you realize at your age, it's dangerous to live alone in a house this big. He sounded genuinely concerned, and for a second I wondered, maybe they were really worried about me. Maybe I had overreacted to their offer. But then I remembered Caroline's face as she took my wallet. No concern, just cold determination. I remembered the fake lawyer, the strange guests, the prearranged arguments. Brandon, if you really cared about my well-being, you would have discussed this with me beforehand. Instead of making a spectacle of yourself in front of strangers, we tried to talk to you, but you absolutely refused to even discuss the subject. I had to take a more drastic approach. You stole my money and documents. We've taken them into temporary custody for your own safety. Dad, think about it. What would happen if you lost your wallet or someone took advantage of your gullibility? I haven't lost my wallet in 40 years. You used to be younger. People become more absent-minded in old age. It's a normal process. I'm not an old man. Of course you're not. I'm just an old man who needs a little extra support. Dad, come home. Let's talk calmly about this. Find a compromise. Come home? After what happened? After they publicly humiliated me and declared me incapable of making decisions? I want my money and my papers back first. Okay. Caroline will bring you your wallet in the morning. In the meantime, come home. Don't spend the night in that awful motel. How do you know where I'm staying? Ellen Collins told me. She's as worried about you as the rest of us. So the neighbor told them my whereabouts? Or did they just call every motel in town? I'm going to spend the night here. We'll see in the morning. Whatever you want, Dad. But remember, we love you and we only want what's best for you. After he hung up, I lay in the dark for a long time, thinking about the conversation. Brandon had said all the right words about love and care, but something in his intonation didn't convince me. Too much acting, too little sincerity. And that line, Caroline will bring you your purse in the morning. Not, I'll return it, but bring it to you, as if it were a favor from them, not the return of stolen property. Sleep never came until the wee hours of the morning. Sunday morning, I awoke to the rumble of trucks on the highway. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, but the traffic was already heavy as truckers hurried to deliver their loads for the start of the work week. The room smelled damp and cheap air freshener. I showered in the tiny bathroom and dressed in the same clothes I'd worn yesterday. In my jacket pocket, I found a crumpled dollar, enough for a cup of coffee from the vending machine. The coffee was disgusting, but hot. I sat on a bench in front of the motel and watched the city wake up. Somewhere out there, a few miles away, was my home, my garden, my life. And I sat by the roadside like a hobo with $300 in my pocket and an uncertain future. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, the room phone rang. The receptionist shouted across the courtyard that it was for me. Raymond, it was Brandon again. His son's voice sounded more strained than it had last night. Gone was the ostentatious concern, and there was a hint of irritation. Dad, where are you? I went to the motel, but you weren't in your room. I was outside. Where's Caroline and my wallet? That's what I wanted to talk to you about. You see, we've discovered some problems with your finances. Caroline's been going through your bank statements. What right does she have to look at my bank statements? Dad, don't be mad. We just wanted to understand your financial situation so we could plan your move. And it turns out there's less money in your accounts than we thought. I have enough money in my accounts to live a normal life. Maybe for a peaceful old age in my own home. But Sunny Gardens is expensive. There's a down payment of $50,000, then a monthly fee. I felt my blood run cold. $50,000, that's most of my savings. I never agreed to move to Sunny Gardens. Dad, but the contract's already signed. We put up a deposit on your behalf. If we don't, we lose the money. What contract? I didn't sign anything. You weren't not at your best yesterday. Maybe you don't remember. Mr. Craig handled all the paperwork with a power of attorney. Power of attorney? What power of attorney? Brandon had no authority to sign documents on my behalf. But if this fake lawyer forged the paperwork, Brandon, cancel this contract immediately. I can't, Dad. It's too late. Your place at Sunnyside Gardens is booked. The money's been transferred. All that's left to do is formalize the sale of the house. I'm not selling the house. Dad, be realistic. You need the money to pay for Sunny Gardens. The house is the only source of that money. I realized I was walking into a trap. They entered into a contract without my knowledge, spent my money, and now they're forcing me to sell the house to pay for their imposed services. I'll go to the police and tell them what? That your son is looking out for your welfare? Dad, don't make this any harder than it has to be. Come home and we'll talk about this calmly. I want my wallet back first. Okay. Caroline's on her way over right now. But promise me you'll listen to our suggestions with an open mind. An hour later, a familiar car pulled up to the motel. Caroline stepped out in a tracksuit and sunglasses, as if she were going on a picnic, not to recover stolen money. She was holding my leather file folder. Raymond, darling, she exclaimed with ostentatious joy. How are you? Did you have a nice vacation at this establishment? Where's my wallet? Here, all your papers and cards. She held out a folder. We made sure not to lose anything. I quickly checked the contents. Driver's license, health insurance, social security cards, all in place. But the credit cards looked strange, like they'd just been activated. What were you doing with my cards? Nothing much. Just checked the balance, made sure there were no fraud issues. Caroline sat next to me on the bench. Raymond, we need to have a serious talk. About what? About reality. You were very aggressive yesterday, yelling at your family, accusing us of some kind of conspiracy. That's not like you. I was defending my rights. Or you're starting to age. Paranoia, suspiciousness. Common symptoms at your age. She spoke calmly, sympathetically, like she was explaining a diagnosis to a sick person, but her eyes were coldly calculating. Caroline, I'm perfectly healthy. Of course you are, darling, but you have to admit, sometimes you need a little professional help. I've made an appointment for you to see a geriatrician. A what? A doctor who specializes in the elderly. Dr. Sanders is very experienced. I'm not going to any doctor. Dad, be reasonable. Her voice is getting harsher. If you refuse a medical examination, it will only confirm our fears about your mental state. It's another trap. If I agree to the examination, I could be declared incompetent. If I refuse, it's considered a sign of illness. And if the doctor finds me healthy, then we'll apologize and give you back your full freedom of action. Carolyn smiled. Oh no. Fair enough, isn't it? There was nothing fair about it. They could have bribed the doctor, faked the results of the examination, found any clue to declare me incompetent. After Caroline left, I returned to the room and found the calls had increased. The phone was ringing off the hook every half hour. Brandon, Caroline, sometimes unfamiliar voices identifying themselves as social workers or Sunny Gardens employees. Mr. Harris, we're concerned about your disappearance, said a woman with a professionally caring voice. Your family reported that you may have trouble orienting yourself in space. I don't have any problems. Of course you don't, sir. But we'd all feel better if you came home. Or let us take you to our facility for temporary observation. What kind of observation? Medical. Purely preventative. A few days under the care of specialists, and if everything's okay, you can go back to your normal life. A few days will turn into weeks, weeks into months, and then you can do any paperwork, sell the house, dispose of the property. By lunchtime, the calls had become more frequent than ever. The phone rang every 10 to 15 minutes. The motel receptionist began to squint irritably in my direction. Listen, mister, she said when I went to answer the phone once again. I'm running an establishment, not a help desk. Why don't you take care of your family problems? Excuse me. I'll ask them not to call again. Oh, and one more thing. An older gentleman came by this morning asking about you. He said he was a relative of yours. What did he look like? Tall, expensive suit. Very well-mannered. Asked how long you'd been here. Who was visiting? If you were all right. Uncle Lester, he was looking for me. He was also interested in that lawyer who was at your party. Showed me a picture, asked if I'd seen him. And what did you say? What was the answer? There were no lawyers here, but the gentleman said the strangest thing. What was that? That this lawyer wasn't a lawyer at all. He lost his license a long time ago, and now he's a fraud. Specializes in defrauding the elderly. So Uncle Lester did run a background check on Mr. Craig, and it confirms what he said at the party. The man was a fraud. Your relative said to tell you that if you need help, to contact him. He left a card. The woman handed me an elegant, gold-embossed card. Lester Harris, attorney at law, family and probate law. At the bottom, a phone number and the address of the downtown office. I went back to my room with the firm intention of calling my uncle, but the phone rang before I could pick it up. Dad, it's an emergency. Brandon's voice sounded worried. We need to meet right away. What's wrong? There's a problem with the paperwork. Turns out the Sunny Gardens contract is invalid. I need your signature. Oh, that's great. So there's not going to be a move. Dad, you don't understand. We've already paid the deposit. If the contract is canceled, we'll lose the money. Your money. How much? $15,000. That's practically all of your savings. $15,000, but this morning he said 50. Why did the amount change? Daddy, please come here. Without your signature, we can't decide anything. And time is running out. The contract is automatically canceled tomorrow. All right, but first I want to talk to Uncle Lester. Why? There's anxiety in his son's voice. Lester doesn't understand the situation. He can only complicate things. He's a lawyer. He's better at contracts than we are. Dad, please, now Brandon was openly begging, don't involve outsiders. This is our family business. We'll handle it ourselves. Lester's not an outsider. He's your great uncle, distant cousin, and I'm your son. Do you trust him more than you trust me? You could almost hear the panic in Brandon's voice. What is he so afraid of? Why won't he let me consult a real lawyer? I'll consider a meeting, but I'll talk to Lester first. Dad, you're making a big mistake. Lester will turn you against us. He's always been jealous of our family. What could he possibly be jealous of? Well, our home, our wealth. Lester is a lonely old man with no family. It pains him to see our family happiness. Family happiness? After yesterday, those words sounded like a bad joke. Goodbye, Brandon. I'll talk to you later. Dad, wait. Don't hang up. There's something I need to tell you. But I had already hung up. For the first time in 2 days, I felt in control. I had Uncle Lester's card. I had information on the fake lawyer. I had a witness to my family's bizarre behavior. Time to go on the offensive. Monday brought the real nightmare. My cell phone started ringing at 7 in the morning and didn't stop ringing until late at night. The calls came every few minutes. The constant buzzing and melodies became a real torture. They called from different numbers, introduced themselves as different people, but the essence was the same. They were trying to force me to return home. Social workers, nurses from Sunny Gardens, some lawyers, even a priest from the local church who was supposedly concerned about the spiritual state of a parishioner. By evening, I tried to count the number of calls. It came to 84, more than 5 calls an hour, almost continuously from morning to night. It was a real telephone attack, an organized campaign of psychological pressure. Each caller repeated roughly the same talking points: that my family was worried about my health, that I'm being unreasonable, that at my age it's dangerous to be left alone without supervision, that Sunnyside Gardens is the perfect place to grow old with dignity. Mr. Harris, your son is very worried, said a woman who identified herself as a social services coordinator. He told us about your behavioral patterns lately. What kind of behavior? Forgetfulness, angry outbursts, suspiciousness? They're natural age-related behaviors, nothing to be ashamed of. I have an excellent memory, and I don't suspect anyone without reason. Of course, sir. That's how people with early symptoms of dementia usually react. Denial is a mental defense. They used a classic tactic. Any objection I made was interpreted as confirmation of the disease. If I argued, it meant I was aggressive. If I agreed, it meant I recognized a problem. There was no way out of this cycle. Around 8 p.m., Caroline called. Her voice sounded completely different, not with ostentatious concern as before, but with a note of desperation. Raymond, I need to talk to you honestly. I'm listening. We have a serious problem. This Uncle Lester of yours is making inquiries about Mr. Craig, finding out what documents he signed, who he met with. What's wrong with that? Raymond, you have to understand, we were acting in your best interest. Yes, we may not have gotten everything legally right, but we had the best intentions. You didn't get it right. They used a rogue, disbarred attorney, entered into contracts on my behalf without power of attorney, ripped me off in front of a crowd of people. And they call that mishandling? Caroline, I want my house and my money back. What money? We didn't take anything. We're just temporarily storing your papers. And the money that was transferred to Sunny Gardens? That was necessary for the reservation. But if you really don't want to move there, we can try to get your deposit back. Try? Well, they have their own rules. There might be a cancellation fee, but you should get the principal back. She was lying. I could hear it in every word. They weren't going to pay back any money, no deposit to Sunny Gardens. The money was probably already spent for their own use. Caroline, exactly how much money did you take from my accounts? Raymond, don't be ridiculous. We're not thieves. We helped you make some payments so we wouldn't bother you with the small stuff. How much? About $25,000. But it's not a loss. The money is working for your future. $25,000. That's more than half of my entire savings. The money Doris and I have saved for decades, saving every paycheck, saving for fun and shopping. I want that money back in my account immediately. I can't. It's already been transferred to various organizations. Sunny Gardens, health insurance, prepaid caregivers. What caregivers? Well, in your condition, you need constant supervision. We've hired a nurse to live with you when you get home. I'm going to have a nurse when I get home? They planned my life, spent my money, hired people, all without a single conversation with me. I don't need a nurse or a caregiver. Raymond, be realistic. After what happened on Saturday, no doctor is going to recognize you as fully competent. Better to compromise now than go through the humiliating process of being declared incompetent. What happened on Saturday? You stole my money and tried to evict me from my house. You yelled at guests, you were aggressive, you refused to listen to reasonable advice. We have witnesses. 80 people saw you react inappropriately. 80 witnesses, most of whom were strangers, invited specifically to create the right impression. And now this testimony was going to be used against me in court. Caroline, I'll get a lawyer. What lawyer? She sounded panicky. Lester. Raymond, he's using you. A lonely old man who's jealous of our family happiness. He'll turn you against your own son. Why are you so afraid of Lester? We're not afraid. It's just that, he doesn't understand the situation. He may misinterpret our actions. And how should they be misinterpreted? As caring about you. Raymond, we love you. Brandon cries every day, worried about you. And you act like we're the enemy. Brandon cries? The same Brandon who publicly declared me crazy and let my wife steal my money? Caroline, if you really love me, then leave me alone. We can't. We have moral obligations. And legal ones too. If anything happens to you, we could be held liable for neglecting an elderly relative. Nobody asked you to take care of me. Shouldn't. Raymond, please, she was begging now. Don't file a police report. Don't bring Lester into this. Let's just do this as a family without any outsiders. Don't file a police report? But I wasn't going to. Yet. Maybe you should, though. Identity and money theft is a felony, regardless of family ties. What makes you think I'm going to go to the police? Lester, he's been talking to people, seeing if there's any grounds for a criminal case. Raymond, you realize if this goes to trial, we all suffer. You too. There'll be a public scandal, newspapers, television. Do you want that? So Uncle Lester didn't just check out the fake lawyer's credentials. He was consulting with colleagues, looking into the possibility of criminal prosecution. and Brandon and Caroline found out about it. Caroline, what happens if I do file a report? Raymond, don't do this. There was real terror in her voice. We're family. How can you send your own son to prison? Jail? So they know they have committed a serious crime, and they know what kind of punishment they're facing. And I'm allowed to send my own father to a nursing home against his will? That's different. We acted in good faith, and a criminal case would ruin Brandon's life, the children's lives. The children? Yeah, Raymond. Think of the grandkids. If their father goes to prison, what happens to them? They'll be without a proper father, without a decent education. You want to ruin your own grandchildren's future? Now, she was playing on my feelings for my children, but grandchildren are unlikely to suffer if their parents are punished for their crimes. On the contrary, maybe it will teach them honesty and respect for others. Caroline, you created this situation. We were wrong. We admit we acted wrongly, but can't we resolve this amicably? We'll give you your money back, cancel your contracts, apologize to the whole family. When will the money be returned? It takes time. It's not that simple with refunds. Maybe a month or two. And the house, have you sold it yet? No, of course not. We can't sell the house without your signature. It's just, showing it to potential buyers to gauge market value. Showing it to buyers? So they were already planning the sale before I even gave my approval. How many buyers were looking at the house? A few, but that's not binding. It's just market research. And who owns the keys to the house? Well, we have a spare set. The one you gave them for emergencies. The keys I gave them 3 years ago when I was in the hospital with pneumonia, in case they needed to get something out of the house in a hurry. And now those keys are being used to show the house to potential buyers. Caroline, you need to stop showing my house right now. Of course. We've already canceled all the viewings. Raymond, please don't be so hard on yourself. Think about your family. Think about your future. Do you really want to ruin your son's life over a simple misunderstanding? A misunderstanding? You stole my money and tried to force me out of my house. We were trying to help you. Yes, we may have chosen the wrong methods, but the goal was a noble one, to ensure you a comfortable old age. After Caroline hung up the phone, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about the conversation. Now the picture was finally clear. They knew about Uncle Lester's investigation, were afraid of prosecution, and were willing to make any concession to avoid prison. 84 phone calls in one day, Caroline's hysterical pleas, promises to return the money all that said they were in serious trouble. And the longer I delayed the decision, the more leverage I'd have. But most importantly, I realized I wasn't alone in this struggle. Uncle Lester is working, studying the legal aspects of the case, consulting with his colleagues. I'll contact him tomorrow. The phone rang again, but I didn't go over. Let them call. I knew now that every call they made was a sign of desperation, not strength. Tuesday morning, I called Uncle Lester from the motel's front desk phone. My cell phone didn't stop ringing for a minute, and it had become impossible to talk on it. My uncle answered right away, as if he'd been expecting my call. Raymond, it's about time. I've been trying to find you for 2 days. Where are you? I'm at the Pine Grove Motel. Uncle Lester, I need help. I'm on my way right now. Don't go anywhere or talk to anybody until I get there. Half an hour later, a black Mercedes pulled up to the motel. Uncle Lester got out of the car in an immaculate dark blue suit with a leather briefcase in his hand. Even at 78, he looked like a man used to being in control. Raymond, he shook my hand firmly. What the hell is going on in our family? We walked to the tiny motel cafe, the only place where we could talk quietly. Lester ordered coffee and pulled a thick folder of documents from his briefcase. I've done some investigating on this so-called Craig's lawyer. Donald Craig does exist, but his license was revoked 2 years ago for elderly real estate fraud. 3 families lost their homes on fraudulent documents he drew up. What happened to him? Got 3 years probation and banned from practicing law for life. But he continues to commit fraud using fake license reinstatement papers. Uncle Lester opened the folder and showed me some pictures. Recognize them. The pictures were of the same Mr. Craig who showed up at my birthday party. The photos were clearly taken in a courtroom. A man in handcuffs, police officers nearby. That's him. But how did Brandon get in touch with him? Craig specializes in families with inheritance disputes, finds people willing to defraud elderly relatives to get an estate, offers his services for a percentage of the estate's value. So Brandon and Caroline were looking for a way to get my house. It wasn't a spontaneous idea born out of concern for my health. It was planned in advance, methodically, with the help of a professional con man. Uncle Lester, what am I supposed to do now? Well, there are several options. We could file a police report. We have enough evidence of fraud, coercion, theft. Brandon and Caroline will do serious time. What if I don't want my son in jail? Then a civil suit, money back, compensatory damages, restraining orders. But they'd get off scot-free. What's the third option? A family settlement. But then they will remain unpunished and may try again after some time. I was silent for a long time, thinking about what I'd heard. Brandon was my only son, the father of my grandchildren. Did it really have to end in prison and ruin fortunes? Lester, do they know about your investigation? Yes, they do. Caroline called me 4 times yesterday, begging me not to destroy the family. Brandon left messages on my answering machine too. What did they say? The same thing they told you, that they were well-meaning, that they were ready to make things right, that a criminal case would ruin the kids' lives. Uncle Lester took a sip of coffee and looked at me seriously. Raymond, I have to tell you something. They've already spent a considerable amount of your money. $25,000 has disappeared from your accounts in the last 2 months. 2 months? But they said they only took the money last week for Sunny Gardens. That's a lie. The transaction started back in June. Small amounts at first. Service fees, counseling, deposits, then large transfers to accounts with obscure organizations. So they've been planning the robbery for 2 months, and I didn't notice anything. Gullibly signing the documents they slipped under the guise of insurance papers or tax returns. And the house? What about the house? Technically, it's still yours, but they've already signed a preliminary sales contract with some construction company. The amount is ridiculous, half the market value. How is that possible without my signature? Shukrumi firm. Craig forged your signature on the power of attorney authorizing Brandon to take over the property. It's legally void, but the buyers don't know that. The picture is finally clear. A multi-pronged, elaborate fraud scheme. And I wasn't just a victim, I was an obstacle that had to be removed as quickly and quietly as possible. Lester, I've made a decision. I want my house and my money back, but I'm not going to press criminal charges just yet. Why not? Give them a chance to make amends. If they return what they stole and leave me alone, we can go to civil court. If they're stubborn, then the police. Uncle Lester nodded approvingly. A reasonable solution. We'll give them 48 hours to think it over. I'll draw up an ultimatum with the exact terms. We returned to Lester's downtown office. Spacious rooms with expensive furniture, shelves of legal literature, a secretary who politely offered coffee and cookies. The atmosphere was solid and reliable, the opposite of the cheap motel where I'd spent the last few days. Raymond, stay here until things settle down, Uncle Lester suggested. I have a guest room, and no one will bother you with endless calls. The room was cozy and quiet, with windows to the patio. After a motel room overlooking the highway, it was heaven. I showered, changed into the clean clothes the receptionist had brought from the nearest store, and felt like a man. In the evening, Uncle Lester showed me the ultimatum that had been drafted. The document was written in dry legal language, but the meaning was very clear. Full repayment of the stolen money within 48 hours. Cancel all contracts made in my name. Surrender of all keys to the house, and an undertaking never to interfere in my affairs again. And if they refuse, then tomorrow morning, we file a police report and a civil suit simultaneously. Extensive fraud, coercion, forgery, that's a minimum of 5 years in prison. Lester emailed the ultimatum to Brandon and Caroline and handed a copy to the courier personally. Now all that was left to do was wait. The answer came 2 hours later. Brandon had called Lester, begging for a meeting, promising to explain and make things right. His uncle set up a meeting for the next day in his office. Raymond, will you be there? I'll be there. I want to look them in the eye. The meeting took place in the large conference room of Lester's office. Brandon showed up without Caroline, looking haggard and aged. Dark circles under his eyes, his suit wrinkled, his hands shaking with nervous tension. Dad, he tried to hug me, but I pulled away. How did we get to this point? You owe me an explanation. We were really worried about your health. After Mom died, you've been so withdrawn, so sad. Caroline said it's dangerous to live alone when you're like this. Brandon, leave those fairy tales alone, Uncle Lester interrupted him sharply. We have documents proving that you've been planning this for 2 months. No concern for your health, just a desire to get the property. That's not true. Then explain the contact with Craig the con man. Explain the fake power of attorney. Explain the pre-sale agreement for the house. Brandon shrank back, realizing it was useless to deny. We were in financial trouble. Caroline lost her job. I took out a loan to expand my business, but things went badly. The bank was threatening to foreclose on our house. So you decided to save your house at the expense of mine? We thought you'd be better off at Sunny Gardens. Professional care, medical supervision. Brandon, where's my money? It was partially used to pay off our debts, but we're prepared to pay back every penny of it. Just give us a month or two. You have 48 hours. Dad, that's impossible. You can't raise that much money in 2 days. Then jail, Uncle Lester said calmly, and a civil suit for the full value of the house plus moral damages. Brandon cried. It was the first time in my life I'd ever seen my son cry, but those tears didn't make me sympathetic. Too much pain and humiliation he had caused me. Eventually, we reached a compromise. Brandon pays back everything he could immediately, about $15,000. The other $10,000 is paid in equal installments over the course of a year. The house stays mine, all contracts canceled, keys returned. But the main condition? A complete breakdown of relations. No calls, no visits, no attempts at reconciliation. Brandon waives all rights to my inheritance in favor of charity. Dad, can't we still be a family? Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied. A family doesn't declare relatives crazy for money. A week later, I returned to my house on Maple Street. Everything looked the same as before, but it felt different, like something important was gone from those walls forever. Not just Doris, who'd been gone for 3 years, but also the belief in family ties and blood ties, in the fact that loved ones would never betray. The roses in the garden were still blooming lushly, the tomatoes were still juicing, the apple trees were still bending under the weight of fruit. The earth remained honest and grateful, unlike people. Ellen, a neighbor, brought pie and told me that Brandon and his family had sold their house and moved to another state. I would never see my grandchildren again, but I was free, in my home among my memories, without fear of betrayal. Family lost forever, but dignity and independence remained.